Welcome to the Write Better Fiction podcast, the show that helps you, well, write better fiction. I'm Shane Miller, urban fantasy author, writing coach, and story geek, and each week I'll be talking to industry experts about the writing craft, publishing, and the business of being an author. Enjoy the show. Hello, fictioneers, and welcome to episode 10 of the Write Better Fiction podcast. How the fuck is it episode 10 already? It seems like I only just came up with the idea for this show, but clearly a good amount of time has passed. Anyway, today I'm chatting with best-selling romance author and podcaster Kristina Adams about creating believable characters. I've known Kristina for a while now, and I know you'll pick up a ton of great tips from this episode, so stay tuned for that. But first, it's time for Question of the Week. Last week's question was, what was the biggest lesson you learned since you started writing? I didn't actually get any answers to this question, but if more trickle in the weeks to come, I will share them on the show. And this week's question is, who is your favorite fictional character and why? Okay, time for my update from the writing chair. You know what they say about the best laid plans, right? If you've been listening for a while, you know that I've been working on the Thea Starling series, which is going to be, or was going to be, my next urban fantasy series, and the first series in an expanded universe, which I'm calling Fallen Olympus. As I was outlining the book, I realized that there are things that if I reveal them now, it's going to mess up the plot for the other series in the Fallen Olympus universe, including the Chosen Vampire series, which I really don't want to do. So I will be writing Thea Starling, but right now I'm working on the first Chosen Vampire book, and I am going to stop flip-flopping on this now because I finally fixed the plot hole that I was struggling with. This is my own fault because this is what you get when you decide to create a multi-series universe where the characters cross over in multiple books. So each timeline has to be on point to ensure that there aren't any plot holes. I spent all of last week outlining Blood Cell, which is the working title for the first book in the Chosen Vampire series, and the outline is now done. I'm really happy with it, and I know I made the right choice to work on this one next. I'm excited to dive into drafting next week because it's been a long while since I put brand new fiction words on paper. And in other news, I'll be at Mark Dawson's self-publishing show live on the 20th and 21st of June. So if you're going to, let me know because it would be great to meet up. If you want early access to episodes and exclusive access to the Fictioneer community on Discord, where you can take part in things like Question of the Week and weekly accountability, you can support the Write Better Fiction podcast on Patreon for just $5 a month. Support the show at patreon.com/writebetterfiction. When I reach 50 patrons, I'm going to start recording monthly Q&A sessions where I answer your writerly questions. Okay, that's about it from me, so let's get into the interview with Kristina. Hello, and welcome to the Write Better Fiction podcast. Today, I'm joined by Kristina Adams. Kristina is the author of the best-selling What Happens In series about two friends who get caught up in the world of celebrity. She's now working on the spin-off series Hollywood Gossip. She's also published 3 non-fiction books for writers: Writing Myths, Productivity for Writers, and How to Write Believable Characters, which is what we're here to talk about today. In 2021, she started publishing her fantasy series under her new pen name, Kristina Adams. The series is about a mother and daughter who just happen to be ghost hunters. Sounds like my kind of series. Think of it like an English Gilmore Girls with ghosts. When she isn't working on her books, she's freelancing as a content marketer, teaching writing over at the Writer's Cookbook, or spending time with her adorable dog, Millie. Hi, Kristina. Welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, and Millie will appreciate the compliment as well.
Well, it's true. Awesome.
She was not adorable today. She didn't want to walk. She hates walks. Yeah. I mean, that's an example of a good character there.
Yes.
A dog who hates walks.
Definitely good inspiration for a character, for sure.
My boyfriend jinxed us. He said that he wanted a dog with lots of personality.
Well, he did get that.
He did, and she is actually in the Ghost Call. She's in the Afterlife Call series. She's inspiration for the very cleverly named Tilly.
Yes. Yeah, I did pick that up. The
dog was called Millie in the first draft because I was too lazy to come up with a name.
Great. Well, if you could start then by telling us a little bit more about you and your journey into writing.
Yeah, so I first started writing when I was really young. I started at about age 7, and I had this little notebook that I just wrote short stories in. And the first one I wrote was actually crime fiction, believe it or not. I didn't read crime fiction at the time. I barely read anything except for poetry, really. But that's when my brain decided to write. And I dipped in and out of writing for all my teenage years, pretty much. And I had a couple of teachers who were quite supportive as well. They encouraged me to write fiction. I had one teacher called Mr. Annie, who was a legend locally. And he told me never to change my voice, and that really stuck with me and probably screwed me over academically a little bit, but like, well, it pays the bills now, so it turned out for the better, really. That, you know, how the right teacher just really sticks with you when they say
Yeah.
something, particularly in those formative years. You know, I was like 12, 13 when he said that. He said he loved reading my essays because of the chatty writing style. Like, that's insane. I wasn't even that big on history at the time.
Yeah.
I got into history like 10 years later. So yeah, and then I studied for creative writing. Studied for creative writing? That's bad English. I studied creative writing at university. And one of the attractions to that was that there was no coursework because I don't do well under pressure. But
Mm.
also, it did teach me a lot about writing and about myself. It grew my confidence. But then after I graduated, I was really lost because, you know, my friends had gone back to where they grew up. I didn't know what to do. The career advisor at uni didn't know what to do with me. I was stuck. And it's only because I went and did a master's degree that I really found a direction. And for a lot of people, I would say you don't need this academic side of things. For me personally, I did, because it helped with a lot of growth. And as part of my master's, we had to put together an anthology, and I co-led it with 3 other people. And I got a taste for publication and didn't want to lose that momentum, didn't want to lose that inspiration. And it really made me go, no, this is the path that I want. And at that point, I had been writing about Holly and Faith for 6 years, I think. I started when I was 18, and then I finally published. I finally committed to them, shall we say, when I was 24, 25, and then published in 2016. And I always knew that that was the story I would publish first, because I'd put little bits on my online forum that I used to run, and you know, the members loved it, not just because it was my forum, but they genuinely wanted to read more. And so that really made me think, well, this is resonating with people. And if it resonates with these people, there's got to be other people out there who connect with these characters as well.
Yeah, that's really great. And it's interesting what you said about your careers advisor at uni there, because I saw a careers advisor in my final year at uni. I did a journalism degree, and at the time it was the wrong time because the bottom fell out of the journalism industry just as I was coming up to graduation, and they didn't know what to do with me either. So that's always fun.
They don't know what to do with writers, do they? Let's just face it.
No, they really don't. Okay, so speaking of writing, one of the concepts that you speak about at the beginning of how to write believable characters is character-driven stories versus plot-driven stories. So what's the difference between the two, and should we be favoring one over the other?
So character-driven stories tend to generally be things like romance, women's fiction, literary fiction. And your plot-driven stories are fantasy, crime, thriller. But they don't have to be mutually exclusive. And this is something that's kind of the cornerstone of what I teach, is that your books, anything you create, whether it's a poem, a story, a game, TV script, film, whatever, will be much stronger if your characters work with your plot. Because if you think about it on a basic level, something happens in our life as a human, we react to it, right? And that's the cornerstone of a plot. X happens to your character, they respond in Y way. And the way I would respond to a particular situation is different to how you would respond, or every single listener would respond, because we all have our own responses internally and then what we do externally based on things that have happened in our past, based on learned behaviors, based on subconscious behaviors, based on what triggers our anxiety, based on what we find stressful. And these are all a very unique network. When you tie them together, it makes your characters much stronger and much more human. And if you think back to some of the most popular books and series of recent times, then they do have that combination of both. And it doesn't have to be a completely insane plot that's really complicated and twisty. And that's one thing that really annoys me about plot-driven stories, but that's a rant for another day.
Yeah.
And it can just be something basic. If you can make your characters human, that's all that matters. You look at John Wick, for example. That's technically plot driven, but people aren't just watching it because it's pretty. I mean, it is pretty. They're watching it and they understand the character because he lost his wife and then some dickhead came and stole his nice car and killed his puppy that his dead wife gave him.
Yeah,
as someone who is into cars and dogs, I wouldn't go on a murderer's rampage, but I would be pissed. I would.
Yeah, and that would be fair enough.
Yeah, exactly. So if you understand those triggers, you understand the character. And you don't want to just like throw backstory into your first chapter and then overwhelm people. You want to kind of trickle it in alongside your plot, because then people understand those behaviors. And another really good example that sticks out to me is The Flat Share by Beth O'Leary. I binge read that over Christmas and I really connected to it because one of my other pet peeves, I have a lot, I don't know if you've noticed, is that in romance, quite often the key conflict is just that these two people can't communicate. Give them something deeper, at least give them a reason why they can't communicate. Is it a big trauma? Is it a tiny trauma where they were just exposed, I say just, where they were exposed to microaggressions, where they couldn't express their personality when they were younger, where they were taught they couldn't be themselves or they weren't allowed agency? These things are still something that can deeply affect who we are and even lead to chronic health issues. So it's really important that you do have those things. And back to The Flat Share, it's different because the circumstances make it harder for the characters to communicate, but also so does their backstory. And we go on this journey with one of the characters as she heals from what she didn't even know was an abusive relationship. She was in complete denial about it. And writing about that journey is fucking hard. But it makes for a really strong book that was very popular and got turned into a TV show that I didn't finish because they changed too much. But it shows how popular the book was, because turning a romance into a TV show never would have been done 5 years ago.
Yeah, definitely. And I think you just melted my brain, because I think I've just realized why most romance stories don't resonate with me, because most of them aren't that deep. Or I say most like it's a catch-all thing, but a lot of the mass market romance right now doesn't deal with those deeper issues. And I think, like you, I think that's a mistake, because
there's clearly a market for it, but that market isn't my readers. My readers know that when they read my stuff, they're going to be confronted with depression, anxiety, addiction, running a business, which is traumatic in itself. Confronting past trauma, probably little hints of how to look after their skin better and eat better, because I just trickle in these things that I'm interested in. I can't stop myself.
Awesome. So something that gets talked about a lot in the writing community is giving your character an arc. What the hell is a character arc, and how can we handle these well?
The simplest way to put it is how your character gets from A to B. And if you're writing a series, you can either have one goal per series, or you can have one per book, or you can kind of take the approach that a lot of 90s TV shows used to have, or a lot of crime TV shows have, where there's like one per episode and then an overarching plot goal as well. And that really depends on you. It can be quite hard to have a different one for every book, which is why if you've got an ensemble cast, you might have in book 1 this character arcs, in book 2 it's that character. There's something kind of comforting when there's a character who doesn't really change. I actually have a character like that in Afterlife Calls, and he's in for it soon. Like 6 books in, but he's in for it.
Good.
Actually, there's 2 that are in for it soon. How fun. Yeah. So your character arc is really how your character gets from this point of they probably don't want to go on this journey, but they don't have a choice, to overcoming all of the things that are holding them back, and they either succeed or they fail, or you can have kind of a bittersweet ending where it's a bit of both. And I'm a big fan of the bittersweet endings because it's more realistic, right?
Yeah.
That there are your positive ones where there is the happily ever after or happy for now. There's the negative ones where everything falls apart and people probably die. Or you can have a circular one. And a circular one is challenging and a lot of people don't like it. The prime example I can come up with and that I really did like was Gone Girl. And I saw the film with my boyfriend, and at the end,
love that fucking film and the book too.
Yeah. But my boyfriend hated it. He hasn't read the
Oh,
book.
really?
He watched the film. We saw it at the cinema, but at the end, he was ranting the whole walk home, going, "I don't understand why they didn't learn anything." I'm like, "You're missing the point of the entire thing." But like I say, the circular ones are very divisive, but they can work. I also know that writing Gone Girl was very emotionally draining for Gillian Flynn. So if you are doing something like that or something negative, make sure you've got some sort of support network or coping mechanisms in place so that you can pull yourself out of it, whether it's dancing around the room with your dog to your happy playlist, or it's, doing some boxing or meditating, expressive writing, whatever it is. Just make sure you've got those coping mechanisms in place, because it can be exhausting, frankly.
Yes, that's very true. As somebody who writes darker themes, you raise a good point there that we often don't talk enough about in the writing community, that although you're writing fiction, the emotion that you're dealing with is probably real on some level.
I when I was writing Hollywood Heartbreak, it's really hard for me to even explain, but that book fucked with me. That, I mean, it's in the title, Hollywood Heartbreak. There's death, there's grief, there's eating disorders, there's depression, there's anxiety, is there a breakup? I can't remember. There's so much going on in that one book. And I remember I was editing it while we were driving home the Christmas before it came out, and I was crying in the car. And I've read this book a gazillion times and it still made me cry, because there's one scene that is just, if you've been in that situation, you'll get it. Let's leave it at that. I don't want to spoil things, but it is so draining. And I haven't released the last book in the Hollywood Gossip series yet because of how draining that penultimate book was to write. And so I do think that we need to talk about how these emotions that our characters feel can impact us as writers, because if we're going to write them effectively, we do need to feel them and we need to be able to express our emotions. And I sometimes think the people who don't express their characters' emotions as well are the people who are not as emotionally aware themselves, which is probably a bit controversial. But if you don't know how to express your own, how can you express someone else's of your creation?
Yeah, that is a completely valid point. I actually agree with you, controversial or not. I also enjoyed the way you spoke about goals, objectives, flaws, and motivations in the book. In fact, it was one of my favorite sections. So can you explain what each of these things are and why they're important if we want to write these believable characters?
Yeah, so this is kind of tied to your character arc. Your goal is the thing they want at the end of the book or series. The objective is kind of the smaller steps they take along the way to get there, or if it's part of a series, you might have an objective for book 1, objective for book 2, or maybe like they've got to collect something before they can do something else, like in Ruby Rose. Why has the book title gone out of my head?
Game of Hearts and Heists.
That one, thank you. The objective is to get the map, right? And the motivation is why they are doing it. What's really pushing them forward, and is it strong enough to overcome their flaw? And the flaw is the thing that I think, as we mentioned earlier in romance, a lot of writers don't go far enough in.
Mm-hmm.
You need to break your character for them to come back a stronger person. Some people aren't breakable, like in Gone Girl, but if you're not willing to push your character to that ultimate breaking point, that dark night of the soul, then your reader is not going to feel as satisfied at the end of your book, because all of these things are tied together. Your motivation has to be stronger than your flaw. So say, for example, the flaw is that someone can't communicate because they were in a previously abusive relationship. That's not to say it's their fault, but like for the sake of simplifying the writing process, it's a flaw. The motivation is that actually they really want to be with this person, so they've got to do the emotional work to overcome it so that they can have a happily ever after, rather than taking this really nice partner who does appreciate them for granted and creating conflict and drama in that relationship.
Yeah, perfect. And obviously, we've touched on some romance stuff already that it doesn't go deep enough, but I couldn't ask a best-selling romance author on the show and not ask a question related to romance characters. So in the book, you speak about the dangers of making love interests too perfect. Why should we steer away from this? And I know, like I said, we've touched on it a little bit already, but how can we make great love interest characters that aren't too perfect?
So a perfect love interest is boring, for starters. And also, if you think about, I'm sure we've all met someone at some point and we're like, damn, they're like, there's nothing wrong with them, and we end up feeling really inadequate. But the thing is, no matter how perfect someone seems on the surface, there is always something. Quite often when they're presenting this facade, there is a lot going on behind the scenes, or they have overcome a lot. Because I'm very into fitness because of I say very into fitness. I don't exercise that much. I'm interested in the psychology of fitness.
Yeah.
And I have found that pretty much every fitness instructor I've come across, every coach I've come across has had that dark night of the soul. Some of them have literally had that moment where they were about to take their own life. They had health issues and they thought, this will not be my life. They hit that pit of despair with depression, and so even if someone does appear perfect, there is something behind what's going on with them. And we now more than ever want characters who are relatable and interesting, and that requires giving them depth. I know that not everyone agrees with me, but I do think romance books, or at least some romance books, should set an example. I learn about relationships from reading books, and so it did play a pivotal role because I got to see what a healthy relationship could look like. At the end of the day, healthy relationships are hard. They are also about bringing out the best in each other, but also accepting that the other person has these flaws and learning to find that balance, learning to accept that the other person is human. And it's really helpful if your love interest has something, whether that's a skill or an attitude or something, that your main character doesn't have. So maybe one is a pessimist and the other one is an optimist. Or maybe one is a workaholic and the other one teaches them to chill out. It has to have that sense of balance, or yin and yang.
Yeah, and I guess that's where, if we do that and add that depth, I guess that's where the protagonist character arc comes from, or at least how you can highlight their flaw to the reader, right?
Exactly. And then your love interest gets one as well, because they will naturally have some sort of flaw that is the opposite of your main character. And one of my most popular characters actually is Aston from What Happens in New York. And he's the love interest of the main character, Holly. And in the course of 5 books, I can't count, he starts out and he doesn't really arc in the first book. He's just he hints at the fact he had a bit of a difficult childhood, but now he's happy in his career. And then in book 2, it's all taken away from him. And he has an accident that basically makes him unable to move for 3 to 6 months. And his girlfriend has to become his carer. And he then has to deal with the anger issues that his fitness addiction had been suppressing. So then he just becomes the most horrific person, frankly. And all his friends say that he's incorrigible, and he doesn't want to hear it until something happens with Holly to show what kind of person she really is and how he's missing out on his life, her in his life. And then the rest of the series is him trying to face those demons that are partially of his own creation and partially because of his difficult childhood, and showing Holly that actually he does feel guilty, he was wrong, and he wants to become a better person and have her back in his life, and that he's not going to let her down again. And that journey just, it resonates with people.
Yeah, that's awesome. And you might have just convinced me to go pick up one of your romance books, which I thought I'd never say. Awesome. So I thought it was great that you included a section on setting in the book about character creation, because we rarely think of the two in tandem. So why is setting so important to creating believable characters?
So setting can reflect who your character is. It can also enhance it. It can even become a character in its own right. So consider, you can't see the state of my desk and I'm not going to show you, but someone in a messy room is very different to someone in a neat and tidy room. They feel differently. They think differently. Maybe one has ADHD. Maybe one's on the autistic spectrum. You know, my room is traditionally quite messy, and it drives my boyfriend up the wall because he's very, very tidy. And you know my room is tidy usually because he's looked at it and it's really wound him up, and he's just spent 2 hours cleaning it for me. I don't ask him to, I should add, it just annoys him that much. Whereas I don't notice it. And so that setting immediately tells you something about the way I work and the way that he doesn't. And you can also have it like, think of a ghost story. The atmosphere in a ghost story is key to it being creepy or not. You can have a cute and fun ghost story, like there's a lot of paranormal women's fiction that's cute and fun, or you can have one like The Woman in Black that is very creepy, and there's lots of darkness and hallucinations and the mist and the fog and all of that. And it can give characters depth, it can increase tension, and it can really lure your readers in a way that pretty much nothing else can, because there are some people who will connect much more with the setting and the description of your story sometimes. And so having that, I don't think there's ever a downside to bringing in your setting and making it much more vivid.
Yeah, I agree. Setting is one of my favorite things to do. Don't tend to add it until the edit because I'm a very light drafter, but yeah, definitely one of the good things to put in.
I tell you what, I do struggle with it. I do struggle with description and the setting, but because I can see it in my head, but then I forget to write it in the scene.
Yeah.
And then I go back and edit and I'm like, it doesn't even say they're sitting in a chair. I should probably add that in.
Yeah, probably should. Listeners might not know this, but Kristina and I share an editor, and the notes I always get back are like, setting, we need to see where it is. I'm like, yeah, I know.
Mine is usually world building. Yeah. Why does this happen? How does this happen? What are the mechanics of this? What are the consequences of this? But because I've now got a series Bible that documents all of this, it's a little bit easier because she helped me fill in the gaps in the Bible.
Yeah, she's a star. Like
she is, and she's really like into the setting and the world building and stuff. And I love the way she describes stuff in her books. It's so pretty, so vivid, so vivid. Yeah, and then she sends me pictures of like places in Romania, for example, that have inspired certain scenes, and I'm like, oh my god, I saw that.
Yeah, it's crazy. Yeah, couldn't do without her at this point, I don't think, but there we go. Okay, so in the book, you have a chapter on dialogue, which I loved because dialogue's one of my favorite things. And the phrase that you said at the top of the chapter was, dialogue helps us show our readers who characters really are. So how does dialogue help us do that?
The way we speak reflects our internal beliefs, our fears, our hopes, our dreams, and basically everything else about us. Like the fact that I'm talking very fast right now is both excitement because I love talking about this stuff and you're always fun to talk to, and also because I've got ADHD. So I do talk fast. I have hamsters in my brain that just have a party all the time. And so this dialogue that happens between characters, it reflects their relationships with other people and also with themselves. One thing that I've really highlighted lately because of the psychology books I've been reading is when people say, I can't do that.
Mm.
And it's a certain type of person that says they cannot do something and treats it like a definite. Usually someone who does struggle with their mental health, maybe they are depressed or anxious or fearful or something else. And the immediate hard stop to something says a lot about the fact they won't even try, because the can't is a not a physical block, a mental block. And this is something I'm personally working on, which is why I highlighted it. And actually, most things we can figure out. And it's a case of, I can't do that yet. Or that I can't is actually, I won't. And when we don't want to do something, our mind and our body can find ways to stop us from doing the thing.
Mm-hmm.
For example, I was reading a particularly we'll say challenging, want of a better word, book earlier. And because my brain did not want to hear about those topics because they challenged my status quo, I had tinnitus, I had pain in my arms, I had brain fog, I had a headache, and I had a fatigue flare-up because my brain didn't want to hear these new ideas. And that's the length that our brains can kind of go to stop us. So that language that we use internally and externally can then reflect our reality and our experience of the world. And I have certainly noticed the way my boyfriend communicates, for example, is very different to some of the people I know who are more negative and who are stuck in a negative cycle, or the way that my editor and I discuss things is very different, very open, very accepting. And some people would not know how to approach that level of just, I guess, comfort with the other person, where you can discuss things without judgment. But that is a healthy relationship where you can discuss things without judgment. And so everything from if a character makes a sarcastic remark to if they just sit and don't speak reflects who they are. And, you know, that sarcastic remark could be because they're nervous. It could be a defense mechanism. It could be a reflection of a similar situation they've been in the past, and they're immediately putting their walls up. You know, one of my characters who's the most sarcastic, it's because he's a 4,000-year-old sort of mummy, and you know, it's his defense mechanism is to make jokes. In my latest book that's out the end of March, he makes many jokes about the fact that there is a murderous ghost on the loose, and he's just been freed from a 4,000-year-old coma, and now he's going to be killed by a psychopathic Victorian. He makes a lot of jokes about that, and that was great fun to write. It's also a reflection of, you know, he's trying to protect himself and the people around him in the only way he knows how. And it reflects the relationship he has with the other people. And there's one line that always sticks with me that I came up with kind of on the fly and didn't intend to put. It didn't plan initially, but I was like, I've got to include this. And what is it? They were talking about anxiety and masking and things, and waking up from being trapped or in a coma for so long because this murderous Victorian ghost was trapped as well. And he jokes that he masks from himself. He is hiding from his own trauma. And later in the series, that's going to catch up with him.
Yeah. Awesome. Some of those lines you come up with on the fly are the best lines.
I know, right?
Yeah.
Funnily enough, I couldn't remember it then to recite it, and that's what I'd intended to do. But because I've written it in the book now, it's completely gone out of my head, and I just remember the concept instead. But just know that Fadil is one of my most popular characters, and he's really funny.
Yeah, he is funny. Okay, and it's interesting, actually, you mentioned sarcasm and masking there, because I write in urban fantasy, and we all know sarcasm is like one of the pinnacles of the genre, and it is often masking some flaw. Like that's the reason they're sarcastic, because they don't want to deal with whatever that emotion is. So
Exactly.
that's a great point about subtext too. What we say isn't always necessarily what we mean, or yeah, like you said, it could be masking something a lot deeper. So it's
Yeah,
a
and the
lot of fun
beauty
to
of a
play with.
book is that we can explore those things. We don't have to outright say this isn't what they meant, but you can show it in their body language. You can show it in the room that they're in if it's in their house. You can show it in the way that they interact with other people. And it's really hard to portray that subtext sometimes on screen. And I love the Gone Girl film, but a lot of just how messed up the characters are, you do lose without the inner monologue that you get from the book.
Yeah, and I think often that's probably why the books are better, because they've got that
Yeah.
room to explore all those deeper things, which is great. Okay, I'm going to put you on the spot a bit now because I'm a bit of a dick. Of all the novels, stories, or pieces of fiction you've ever read, who's your favorite character and why?
I found this really hard, This is an evil question.
Thank you.
The problem I have is that what I like on a personal level is often different to what I like on a technical level. Like, I used to watch Mamma Mia as a comfort film, but
Right.
from a technical level, it's not as good. And the dance moves used to really wind me up I did dancing when I was younger. But I did come up with a character. He's not from a book.
That's fine.
It's Steve from Stranger Things.
Okay, I might be the only person on the planet who's not watched Stranger Things.
You're not. My boyfriend won't watch it either, even though it's the genre that he likes to watch. But I think it's the thing with Stranger Things is it's a slow build up.
Right.
But what I love about Steve is that in season 1, sorry for the spoilers, Shane, or anyone else who hasn't
It's
seen
fun.
it. He is your typical horrible jock character. He's a bully. He's kind of charming in that way that, those kind of jockey characters are, but he's still just a horrible person. And if I remember rightly, the creators of the show, the Duffer Brothers, did plan to kill off his character initially, and they ended up liking the actor too much because he in himself is actually quite charming. And so what they did was they gave him this really powerful character arc where he is kind of knocked off his pedestal after he finishes school and goes to work a bunch of dead-end jobs, and he has a different job every season. And this kind of brings him down several pegs. And also, as the series progresses, there becomes a running joke that he is the babysitter of the younger characters. So he defies these gender stereotypes. He's not the guy saving the day. He's the one driving the minivan. He's the one that's surrounded by these tweens who've got weapons, and he's like trying to stop them or trying to, take charge, get some level of order, and they're just ignoring him. And he's like, but he's such a popular character that when the first part of season 4 aired, there was loads of stuff saying, don't kill Steve, don't kill Steve, don't you dare hurt Steve, because he was so popular. And I think he's actually probably one of the most popular characters because he's so interesting and he's been on this real emotional journey. I do have an honorable mention as well that from a book series.
Okay.
But it's one I've not read for a while. But it's specifically the books, not the TV show, although I do love the show. And that's Rizzoli Isles.
Okay,
by
yeah.
Tess Gerritsen. And I love their characters because in the books, Isles is described as something like the Queen of Death or something.
Yeah.
I can't remember exactly, but like she's super goth and she deals with so much. She has her ex-husband. She has a relationship with someone she should not have a relationship with. And Rizzoli has to overcome not wanting to let other people in, basically. And she does that and then goes on to have a really strong relationship. And it's a supportive friendship. It's a supportive found family. The characters have depth, they have drama, they have personality, they have strengths, they have weaknesses, and their relationship drama does not revolve around that lack of communication. If there ever is any communication issues, it's usually fear-led, not wanting the other person to get hurt. or they might have lost their phone or ran out of battery, or they're stranded somewhere, you know? It's always got more depth, and there is always something more to it. And also the way Tess Gerritsen just describes things, it's so detailed.
Yeah, it is.
Have you read The Surgeon? I think it's The Surgeon. Yeah, the first one.
Yeah.
That's the only book I've ever read that's made me feel physically sick.
Yeah, I can understand why.
I think if anyone's read it, they will get it as well.
Yeah.
I am quite squeamish, so that doesn't help. But
well, I'm not, and it made me feel sick too.
oh wow, that kind of makes me feel a bit better actually.
Oh, awesome. And I'll sneak another question in, actually. You spoke about Steve there, who went on kind of a journey from unlikable to likable, if not loved, from Stranger Things. So what is your opinion on, because I've seen things on Instagram and people being like, oh, well, you don't want to make your character unlikable because then people won't resonate with them. What's your opinion on that?
I think it's bullshit.
Yeah, same.
Like,
absolutely.
The thing is, there are certain things that I do think are unforgivable, but then you look at characters like Joe from You and Dexter from Dexter, and they are murdering people and still liked. Like, the guy who plays Joe in You has literally come out multiple times and said he is not a love interest. Stop fantasizing about him.
Yeah.
And people still do. So you can go far, but you've got to do it fearlessly. And that's what a lot of people don't do. And again, I think this actually ties back to personal issues. If you are not willing to go far enough, I don't think it is a lack of writing knowledge. I think it's a lack of, I guess, personal knowledge of not exploring those depths of your personality, and for whatever reason being too afraid to go there. And that's probably controversial, but like I said, I've been reading a lot of psychology lately.
No, I think you've got a point there, because it is, I mean, especially if you're writing your first novel, it is hard to put it all on the page. Because I guess a newer author would be like, oh, are people going to think this is me? Are people going to judge me for this? Personally, I don't care. That's just my standpoint, because, you know, we're not our work. But yeah, I think you do need to delve into those deeper emotions. There's no way around it, if you want to connect with readers anyway.
Yeah, and the thing is, people will probably not read your work in the way that you think you do. I wrote something once, and it was 4 friends living together, and I had 3 different people go, is this character based on me?
Yeah.
I'm like, no, you're not even a writer. But they saw a reflection of themselves in that character's personality. And, you know, the only character I've ever based on myself is Holly from What Happens In. But now who Holly is very, very different to who I am. And, you know, the more you lean into those emotions, like we said, the more it will resonate with your readers. And I think part of why Steve resonates with people is because he was essentially up here at school, and then he was down here the minute he left. And that's a really relatable journey, because I don't know if this is fact or stereotype, if I'm honest, but a lot of the most popular people from school are not that successful in life.
I would say that's, if not fact, then at least 99.9% true.
Yeah, I have definitely heard that the people who were bullied more, who were classed as the geeks and the nerds and the weirdos, they are the ones who go on to be successful.
Yeah, anecdotally, I would agree.
Yeah, and I guess it depends on what your definition of success is. You know, a lot of the people I went to school with would not want to be on a podcast. They wouldn't do public speaking. They don't care about publishing a book. For them, success was marriage, family. For me, it's boyfriend, dog, car, books, freelancing clients, not being in pain.
Yes.
You know, different priorities.
Yeah, definitely. So this is the Write Better Fiction podcast, and this is my favorite question, so I ask all my guests. Kristina Adams, why do you write fiction?
So I just want to preface this by saying I love this question.
Thank you.
And my answer to why I write is to escape, to process, and to heal.
Love that. That's a brilliant way to end the episode. So tell everyone where they can find out more about you and everything you do.
So all my books, fiction and nonfiction, Kristina Adams and Casey Adams, is at KristinaAdamsAuthor.com, and that is Kristina with a K. All my writing advice is at writerscookbook.com. And if you want to go even deeper on your character creation, you can check out my character creation crash course, which you can find under the courses tab on the Writers Cookbook.
Wow, I wouldn't want to say character creation crash course if I was inebriated.
No, it's really hard to say it when sober, so definitely don't try after alcohol. Definitely.
But lots of alliteration, so very catchy.
Yeah.
Cool.
I usually shorten it to CCCC because I can't be bothered to type it or say it. But that's actually even worse to say now that I said it aloud.
Yeah, that is very true. Awesome. Well, thanks for coming on the show, Kristina. That was great.
Thank you for having me.
I hope you enjoyed the interview with Kristina and picked up a ton of actionable tips on how to write believable characters. Join me next week when I will be buzzing because I'm talking to one of my favorite fantasy authors of all time, the incredible Helen Scheurer, all about how to write a successful series. Have a great writing week. Thanks for listening to the Write Better Fiction podcast. Remember to hit subscribe on your favorite podcatcher and leave a review, and we'll chat again next time.